Have you ever felt so enraptured by the story of a game, it felt like it's the only thing you could think of for maybe weeks or even months on end when you open the door to Sayori's bedroom in Doki Doki, or when you find out about the lore of the world with Joyce in Disco Elysium? Today, my friends, I'd like to talk to you about a game that has been occupying my mind for what feels like eons. Let me tell you about the world of Signalis. First things first, this isn't a horror game. There are a couple of heavy themes, but it's unlikely that you'll get scared by it, unless you are homophobic. If you haven't played this game, please go play it. It's the type of game that has to be experienced firsthand, and the less you know about it, the better it'll be. Livestream from my Discord. Stop watching and go play it. This is the last time I am going to fucking warn you. If you clicked on this video expecting a comprehensive lore breakdown of the story of Signalis, you came to the wrong place. Scram, skedaddle, get the fuck out of here. There are other videos that have already done that in a much smarter and more comprehensive way than what I did here. Although I will be going over a bit of the lore, the real goal of this video is to walk you through the game while pointing out many tiny details you might have missed and having some interesting discussions about the world building, symbolism, and other pretentious topics like that. Though I will be giving you a pretty good overview of the events that occur in the game, this is by no means a lore video. The lore of Signalis is notoriously confusing, obtuse, and many parts of it are deliberately left open to interpretation. A lot of the questions the game asks don't have direct answers, and it's up to you to piece together something based on what you know. I've thought of many different ways that I could write the script, and I settled for basically playing through the entire game in a way that feels like you're experiencing it for the first time, while also touching on many of the discussions that it brings to the table. And 20,000 words later, I am here with my most ambitious video to date. Even though it's like 2 months late. Like I said, if you haven't played this game, go play it. And if you don't intend to, pray that I don't find you. Without further ado, let's begin. Very well, where do I even start with Signalis? Probably from the beginning. What's going on in the game is a bit of a difficult task to understand, not only because it's heavily loaded in symbolism, but also because half of it is written in a made-up language that I think some people refer to as German. The fuck is that? You can't convince me that's a real word. The first thing you see when you load up a new save are the words "wake up" typed out like a command, and then the face of a woman opening her eyes. At this point in the game, you are not supposed to know who you are or what's going on, but little by little the game drip feeds you with more information. Through the exploration of this initial area, we come to learn a couple of things. For starters, we are aboard a spacefaring vessel known as the 512 Penrose. The Penrose is a low-cost spaceship designed to be sent beyond the edge of the solar system to look for habitable planets. And based from the view of the flight deck, we crash into an icy landscape. A little manual on the corridor tells you that the ship is supposed to be piloted by a Gestalt scout officer and a land survey ship technician replica, designated as an Elster unit. That would be us, at least according to what we saw right as we were waking up. What is a Gestalt and what is a replica? You're not supposed to notice at this point, but we will get there shortly. As you explore the ship, you'll notice how the Gestalt scout officer is nowhere to be found, not even in the cryopod. The only clues we have of her existence are these heavily damaged photographs, a missing suit in the airlock, and this smeared diary page that gives us glimpses of what the bigger picture could be. For now, the only thing we can do is to put on the suit ourselves and brave the wintry landscape to find her. After threading through the snow, we come face to face with this black archway, and right behind it a red well with a conspicuously human-sized hole that leads us to a room. Okay, so there are a lot of things in this room that relate to concepts that we will see further on in the game, and going everything we see here is not only going to take a lot of time, it's going to be quite confusing. But for now, the main things I want to bring your attention to is that the hole we just crawled out of is gone, there is a safe on the corner of the room, and upon the table there is a book called The King in Yellow, a cosmic horror work by Robert William Chambers. In preparation for this video, I actually read the entire book, even though I said I wasn't gonna do that on my Discord, and it's basically a collection of short stories where weird things happen. That's the best way I can put it. In the book The King in Yellow, the aforementioned King in Yellow is a play that is said to be the pinnacle of artistic expression, literally the most engaging thing ever written, but it comes with the little side effect that everyone who makes it to chapter 2 goes delulu. For now, all you need to know is that upon picking up the book, the radio and the computer will turn on, and we will witness this masterpiece of an opening sequence that I can't show you on account of YouTube's copyright system being a pathetic fucking joke, but it looks really cool. The short of it is that you see these numbers appearing on screen, as well as a series of images, all while Elster's face gradually loses its skin to reveal an endoskeleton. I highly recommend you watch it after this video, or right now. Just please come back, I spent so much time working on this. So for this video, whenever we reach a cutscene, I will let it play it out, both because it's fucking Kino and also because playing it means a bigger video, which means bigger watch time, which means more money for me. I did say in the beginning of the video that I was going to obsess over every little detail, and you bet your ass I will. This intro section is absolutely packed with symbolism and concepts that are kinda hard to grasp now, but we will get back to them as they become relevant throughout the game. For now, just outpost, island, girl with braid, girl with white hair, Rember, Pommis. Gentlemen, welcome to Sierpinski, an underground facility located on the planet of Leng, right at the edge of the solar system. In the name of fulfilling our promise, whatever the fuck that might be, we have come to look for our Gestalt officer. Right out of this bathroom, we find a little pamphlet that tells us a bit about the place. Sierpinski is both a vocational school as well as a mining facility aimed to help with the war efforts against the Empire that controls the inner portion of the solar system. The outer portion is controlled by the Yuuzhan Nation, and we are one of their many facilities controlled by the National Ministry of Work and Education, also known as EON. Just a quick glance around the reception tells you that something is off. The place is not only deserted, it is also desolate. On one of the corridors we find the carcass of a Yule unit. She's a replica just like us, but she is in a horrible state, boasting, quote, infected-looking biocomponents bulging out of her damaged shell. I believe I know a Chekhov's gun when I see one, and I also know that it's better to pack some iron before walking down this corridor again. At this point, there's no way of knowing what happened to her, but it's very clear that something worrisome is going on with this facility. That belief is further reinforced when we meet the first NPC of the game.
An Adler unit. You should leave this place. This facility is lost. Turn back before it's too late.
I am looking for this woman. Have you seen her?
I don't know her, but she might be one of the workers. Our Gestalt workers were sent to the mine below the facility. If she's still alive, she's probably down there. There's an access elevator to the mine one level below, but you'll need an admin as the key to use it.
There are a couple of things about this conversation that are bound to make you curious. For starters, this woman we just talked to is a star unit. She's a replica just like us, but she's from a different model. Star units are low-cost combat units measuring 220 centimeters in height and made for close combat and riot control. You might have noticed how she used the term Gestalt, which is the word we've seen at the beginning of the game back at the Penrose. The ship is piloted by an Ulster unit and a Gestalt scout officer. Gestalt is the German word for being, like an animal or a plant, and it's used as a derogatory term for human in Signalis. On the documents we find throughout the facility, we know that a certain term has been redacted. Reddit user Silver42 noted how one of the items, the Protector keycard, has a poorly blacked out term that could either be human or humanity in German. But this term could just as well be something along the lines of re-educational or re-education. Why are those terms redacted at Sierpinski? It's hard to tell, but my bet is that there's something to do with the war effort we just learned of. One more thing I'd like to bring your attention to is that the picture we've shown the star unit is different from the one we found at the flight deck. We know for a fact that the Penrose only had 2 members on board. We are one of them, and the other person is the Gestalt officer we're looking for, which is probably this woman. But it could also very well be this woman, and at this point you might have noticed that they look kinda similar. Is this just a Des reusing assets, or is there something that we're missing here? If there is, you're the only one who's missing. I already played the game. Presumably this place is a vocational school of some sort, evident by the classrooms around here. But with the Protector key we got from the room with the star unit, we gain access to a little observation deck with a one-way mirror with a classroom on the other side. The Gestalts aren't here to learn, they are being monitored, as are you if you've taken notice of the cameras. With the items we got from the— oh shit, morning girly. With the items we got from the observation room, we can now go meet our second NPC in a room just up ahead.
Oh, hello. You don't belong here either, do you? I'm Isaak. You should be careful. There's something wrong with this place. I don't know what happened, but it's probably dangerous to go any further. That's okay. I understand. I have something I need to do too. Take care. I hope you find what you're looking for.
This lady is basically our Sigurd. We will see her a handful of times throughout the game as we both share a similar goal. Not unlike us, Isa is also looking for a gestalt here at Sierpinski, a woman by the name of Erika. May I also bring your attention to the fact that she was one of the characters that appeared very quickly during the intro sequence, in a section where she shed some of her own blood over the symbol of Signalis. What does that mean? Oh, I won't be touching too much on the puzzle sections, but at this point in the game we're supposed to unlock a vault we found on one of the classrooms. The password is 204512, and I'm bringing your attention to this because those last three numbers are respective of our vessel, the Penrose 512. There are a lot of reoccurring themes in Signalis, and this number is one of them. There are a handful of times on the later stages where we will see it appear in places that seemingly have no correlation to the Penrose. Well, now that we have the key, we can access the locked classroom and jump down a hole to access the first proper level of the facility. Down at the workers' quarters, we begin to get a slightly clearer picture of both what Sierpinski was as a facility as well as the chain of events that led it to ruin. The place is in a state of disarray, trash bags littering the floor, corrosion seeping through the metal walls, but the surveillance system is working perfectly fine. Across our path we see more dead EOL units, but the gestalts are nowhere to be found. Entering one of the dormitories shows us that the living conditions were close to subhuman, as not even in their quarters are they afforded any privacy or even in the locker rooms near the shower. The gestalts are supposed to be sleeping in cages and be under the constant surveillance of the facility's administration 24/7. Fun fact, these types of beds and dormitories actually exist in real life in China, and living in one of them will set you back about $170 a month. It's finally a place that I can afford to live with my YouTube revenue. This is a joke, obviously, I don't make that much money. In one of the beds we find a note from a woman named Alina Seo, and it shines a little bit more light in the situation at the facility. Quote, "Feeling a little lightheaded today. I hope it's not that new flu that seems to be going around. I can't afford to miss any more shifts. That starch at the factory was chewing me out for what felt like hours for fainting at work last time I got a cold. I haven't seen Elster the last few days. I hope she's okay. More and more people go missing in the mine lately, including replicas. Not even the protectors seem to be safe." The main pieces of information we can extract from this are 1. The gestalts are being insanely overworked and abused by the staff, 2. There was a disease that was starting to spread through the facility, and 3. Something fucked up is going on in the mines, the place where our gestalt officer is presumably at. But let me bring your attention to 2 more things. This note mentions 2 replica models. There's a Storch, which is a type of protector unit we will meet in a moment, and there's Elster, an Elster unit. Us, in other words. The thing is that Elster units are designed for interplanetary exploration. Remember, they're land survey/ship technician replica models from the documents we found at the Penrose. So what exactly is one of them doing in a populated mining facility? I feel like this would be a good point to explain what exactly is a replica. Replicas are basically a type of android built off of both synthetic and organic components that are used for all sorts of labors. What those labors are will depend on who they are a replica of. Basically, imagine that you had to pick an individual to do a certain job. Let's say that you want to pick someone to be a kindergarten teacher. To do a job like that, do you think it's better to pick someone with a calm demeanor, a lot of patience and fondness for children, or someone with a strict, authoritative and tough demeanor? Probably the former, although the latter would make an excellent sergeant. That's basically the way that replicas work. A certain individual will have a personality that will be optimal for a certain task, so someone decided to copy their personality and memories and implant them into robots that would perform similar tasks. For that reason, pretty much every replica that comes out of the factory will be virtually identical to one of the same model, since their former memories, personalities, and current experiences are all the same. This means that right after being created, they will behave in exactly the same predictable way every time. However, as they continue to live on and accrue more life experiences, their personality might begin to shift, just like you'd expect from a real person going through certain life events that may fundamentally change who they are or how they perceive things. And what this could mean is that over time, their personality and demeanor may become less optimal for their designated tasks. In other words, they become less efficient. This phenomenon is known as persona degradation, and if it gets bad enough, it is a reason for a replica unit to be discontinued. To ensure that their personas remain stable, there are certain behavioral patterns that each replica should follow based on their replicated neural pattern. as well as fetish objects that, despite the name, are basically just objects that keeps them stable. Like a gun for a protector unit whose neural pattern is probably based off of someone who is fond of guns, or an animal plushie for Mina units because they are fucking adorable. One more thing that could prevent persona degradation is to avoid having anything that could cause memories of the original neural pattern to resurface, as remembering the events and feelings of a life you've never experienced could bring forth existential crisis on what it means to be a sentient copy of someone who already was, what it says about your identity, who you are as an individual, etc, etc. Basically things that you don't want someone to think about if you want them to work efficiently. By the way, do you remember that Storch mentioned in the note? She's here, tucked away in a little corner. When we talk to her, she says that she's the protector controller unit on duty for this level and that the commander, as well as the rest of the personnel, have fallen ill, so indeed there is an epidemic going on. She doesn't really know much more than we do, but she says that the administrator might. For now, she's just gonna stay in her cozy little office waiting for new orders or reinforcements from the planet of Haymat. Aha, very clever. This is indeed the same woman from our picture. Why does her keycard unlock the west wing of the dorm? I'm gonna have to owe you that one. But while we wait for the next relevant thing to happen on screen, let's talk a bit about the Storch unit. Storches are the highest ranking common protector unit and the 4th highest ranking replica model in Sierpinski overall. They are also one of the tallest models, measuring 240 centimeters in height, and are also known for their tough and strict demeanor, with the arguable exception of the one we just met since she's too much of a pussy to go outside. In the meantime, we managed to unlock this little box over here, and upon retrieving the hexagonal plate contained within it, we are transported to a snowy radio outpost. This place does have lore relevance, as it is one of the locations we saw in the intro sequence. We learned from one of the notes that the box belonged to Alina Seo, the same one who wrote the note we found on the dorms. And if the order of these files is to be believed, it's also the girl that we are looking for. But in the outpost we find a letter that doesn't mention the name Alina Seo. As a matter of fact, it is addressed to one Radio Officer Young, and that last name is one we already saw before. It belongs to the Gestalt officer at the Penrose. Quote, "Dear Iris, I hope you and Ariane are both well. I've spoken to the officials at Eon, and they agree that it would be best for Ariane to attend school in Sector C. I have a spare room she can stay in until she graduates. I know you two are inseparable, but we both know that it is best for your daughter if she receives normal education in the city. Love, your sister, Camilla." This is good because we can already piece together that the specific section is related to our Gestalt officer, and we learn that her name is Ariane Young. But the question is, why? Why is it that getting the item from the box belonging to Alina takes us here? Who even are these people? In the outpost we get the replica radio module, which is a tool that we will use very frequently to solve some puzzles in the game, just like the puzzle we need to solve to get out of this very outpost. Once we tune into the correct frequency and let it play out for a few instants, we are transported back to Sierpinski, only the radio module is still with us. How did we get it if the box only had the hexagonal plate inside it? The story of Signalis is not told in a chronological order. What was this, a dream sequence where we teleported to the outpost? Maybe getting the plate made a memory resurface on the Ulster unit and we remembered how to use the radio? Not really, since the game quite literally tells us that there is no module prior to that interaction. Anyway, now that we have the radio module, we can go to the next area, but I just want to bring your attention that this place has a torture room and whatever the fuck this place is. Since our objective is to go to the mines, the most direct way to reach it would be to the mineshaft elevator, but we need the administrator key to access it, and we're most likely to find it at the lower levels of the facility, most likely at the operational command. So that's where we're headed to next, but before that we can go back to the first floor and pay a visit to Isa again. In a short but sweet conversation, she tells us that the person she's looking for is her sister, and should we happen to find her during our descent, to tell her that Isa is looking for her. The truth is that we haven't seen any other Gestalts, only dead or dying replica units, but you never know. We go back to the elevator and enjoy our trip to the 6th floor. Fantastic! Right as we were descending, the power was conveniently cut off and the elevator impounded our card. If we are to continue using it, we need to find another protector card. Thankfully, the elevator stopped at a level we haven't been to before, so at least we won't be stumped. Is it catastrophically inconvenient that the elevator was working just fine until we decided to use it? Yes, and keep this in mind, I have a little theory as to what or who might have caused this. Currently, according to the map on the elevator, we are at the new medical ward, and here we are supposed to find 5 keycards that will unlock the door to the next area. The medical ward is potentially one of the best places to learn about the disease that had been spreading throughout the facility, and sure enough, this place is absolutely littered with little bits of information that paints quite the morbid picture of what happened. In one of the rooms we find a Yule unit. These are units used for light manual labor and are overall known for having a pretty friendly attitude. This one, however, is absolutely terrified at the fact that everyone else got sick and she's probably next in line. One of the lines of dialogue she says that might get overlooked the first time you play is this one.
You look kind of familiar. Have we met before?
We have not, but the replicas do look similar to one another, so maybe she could just be confusing us with a star unit. Keep what you said at the back of your mind. She tells us that at first only Commander Falk fell ill, but then the disease spread to everyone else at the facility. Presumably this Falk is Patient Zero, so if we learn whatever they were doing, we will learn the source of the infection. We don't really have a way to help this Yule unit short of disposing of the infected units in the immediate vicinity, but the truth is that some of the units come back to life even after we dumped a handful of rounds into them. The only way to fully dispose of them is through the use of a thermal flare, which will completely burn the endoskeleton to the point it becomes unusable. On some of the rooms we find more notes telling us about the inceptions and consequences of the infection. First is the medical diagnosis of a Yule unit that got sick. She started to complain of headaches and nausea and was admitted to the hospital after vomiting oxidant, which is the replica's equivalent of blood. This diagnosis is neither the first or the only instance of this happening. Quote, most puzzlingly, the development of this syndrome seems to progress similarly in both replica and Gestalt patients. Initial admission tests showed hypertension, high fever, dehydration, and internal hemorrhaging, strong cognitive decline within the first cycle, alopecia, and purpura. Within 5 cycles, skin will begin to peel in large patches. Decline of vision quality and ability to communicate may follow. Gestalt patients will usually expire at this stage due to infections, while results for replica patients seem to vary. Let's go over what we read here. First is that whenever you see the game mention a cycle, basically just replace that word for day. Since Signalis does have a setting which includes space exploration and different planets, it's only natural that there would be different day and night cycles of the various planets of the solar system, which is our solar system, by the way, just with different names for each colonized planet. Secondly, what the fuck? There are sources both in-game and on the community forums that suggest that the replicas are robots. The idea that a same pathogen could infect both humans and robots is very odd indeed, to the point that I'm pressed to believe that whatever is the root of this infection is not a conventional pathologic agent, but rather something else. However, it is important to note that the replicas do have organic parts in them, for example, their face. We could assume that the pathogen only infects the organic parts, which would explain the symptoms, but there are instances of other infected replicas further on in the game that appear to have non-organic parts also mutated by the infection. On this level, we also find another one of Alina's notes, where she basically says that everyone started to behave strangely, with the protector units prohibiting her from leaving her room, and the Yules gossiping about staff shortage. Once again, she mentions that she's worried about Elster. I said that we had to find specific keys that will allow us to go to the next area. The keys are themed after specific elements, and we find them in fitting places. The fire key is in the incinerator room, the water key is in a flooded bathroom, the air key is on a vent. And one of the keys is jammed inside a rock in the X-ray room, so we need to make a copy of that one. As for the last one, the gold key, we obtain it through an unconventional way. We need to bring a VHS tape into this room and insert it onto this TV, where we will be transported to the serene yet poignant scene. A train cart traversing through an endless snowy brutalist city, carrying within it only one passenger, a white-haired girl sitting alone and downtrodden as the melancholic song plays in the background. And I just find this scene so beautiful, for whatever reason. Though you might not have noticed or remembered at this point, but this is the same girl from the picture we found back at the Penrose. When we try to get close, the lights flash and she disappears, leaving only the gold key in the spot she was seated at. Upon collecting it, we are transported back to the medical ward with the key in our inventory. Though I could try to explain the sequence as just us watching the VHS, the way in which we acquire the key is just as elusive as the experience we had with the butterfly box. Resurface memory, hallucination, who knows. With all the 5 keys, we gain access to the observation theater of the surgery room, and as far as I can tell, the only way is down, so let's send it. This is a Mina, and she's the very first boss fight of the game. Her armor is virtually impenetrable to our guns, so to take her down we need to wait for an opening where her visor retracts and she begins to leak. Very fittingly, Mina units are used for mining, and they can be deployed on high-risk environments due to their powerful armor-plated servo shell. They are the tallest replica model we meet in-game, measuring 260 centimeters in height, and given the context we find them in, they do look very intimidating. But despite the heavy armor and their high-powered mining laser, Mina units are not suited for combat. Their neural patterns are described as very gentle, calm, and motherly, capable of maintaining stability even in high-stress situations. After we blast her, we are presented with one of the most intriguing cutscenes we've seen so far.
A visitor. Welcome to our facility. You've caught us at an unfortunate time. How can I help?
I am looking for a Gestalt.
A worker at our facility? Let me see that picture. Alina Sau. I believe she's one of our factory workers. However, you shouldn't have returned.
I must have fallen asleep waiting for Erica. Did she already go home without me? We wanted to get some books from the library together. I should check if she's still there. It's snowing. It always is. It's empty. Theo always wipes it before I can get down all my notes, so I have to copy them from Erica's. I'm glad you're in the same class, even though it confuses the teachers.
Once again, there's a lot to unpack here, and how about we start with the elevator shaft that we just woke up in that appears to be completely filled with bodies of other Elster units. In this part of the game, we are going to have small revelations about what's really going on in this place. It isn't just an infection, there's an entire conspiracy we need to debunk here. For starters, what the fuck is this? A man in my Sesbian Lex game? He must be the villain. This is Adler, and he's the administrator of Sierpinski. He's a replica just like us, and the notes we found throughout the facility written by his hand don't exactly paint him in a good light. I will go over his details a little later on. For now, let's focus on the elephant in the room. All other healthy replica units we've met so far have been helpful or at the very least neutral towards us, and all their responses are not only appropriate for the situation, but also in accordance with their personas. But not a single one of them looks as calm and nonchalant as Adler. It's as if this situation is nothing more than routine for him. And once he pushes us down the elevator shaft, he says that one most puzzling sentence: "You shouldn't have returned." I don't need to remind you that this wasn't the first time we've been hinted that Elster has been at Sierpinski before. Yes, there's that, but there's also that dialogue with the U unit, as well as Alina's notes. We can't really figure out what's going on just yet, but this part of the game will add a few more pieces to the puzzle. Let's go over the other part of the cutscene. It takes place in the same snowy brutalist city we saw on the train ride. As Isa is looking for her sister, she finds that same white-haired girl being bullied by 3 others. The words that flash on screen right after that are from Isa's point of view, and they translate to this: "In the end, it was my sister and not me who came to help Ariane. Our brief friendship was forever overshadowed by this moment of paralysis. I've always been helpless. Ariane is the white-haired girl, who incidentally is also the one we've seen at the cutscenes at the beginning of the game. We've seen her mentioned in a letter back at the radio outpost as well, where she has been referred to as the daughter to a woman named Iris Young. And from this letter, we can already piece together a very rough timeline of this character. Ariane lived together with her mother Iris at the radio outpost, but eventually moved on to go live with her aunt in one of the cities in the name of her education. But as we could tell from the first-person sections, she didn't really have a good time there, being shunned and ostracized by those around her for reasons that we don't yet know. Later down the line, she gets involved with Eon's space program and eventually becomes the Gestalt Scout Officer of the Penrose, our Gestalt pilot. One thing that we haven't been able to figure out yet, however, is why is it that we're looking for someone named Alina Seo instead of Ariane? Well, right now we are at the lower common levels of the facility. This is where most of the replica units are going to be hanging out at, as well as where most of their dorms are. My question to you is, why do robots need dormitories? From what we've gathered, replicas are robots. Even if they are supposed to be programmed to imitate personality of certain individuals, they're still nothing more than glorified androids, right? Remember earlier in the video when I said that replicas were robots? I was kinda lying a little bit. Even though there are plenty of sources in the game that say that they are indeed robots, the truth is that none of the behaviors displayed by the replicas is explicitly robotic, and nothing about their accommodations suggests that they are robots either. Their dorms have a kitchen, a firing range, a library, beds, and like I said earlier, the minas have toy plushies. None of that sounds like it would be of use to a robot, and the truth is that because they are not for robots. Replicas are artificially created sentient life. Human bodies made out of metal and organic components that contain within them undeniably human memories. They can feel pain, they can feel afraid, and they most certainly can suffer. Hell, one of them was complaining about headaches earlier. Every single replica unit you meet in-game is a conscious being with an inner life and inner thoughts of their own. It's only natural that Eon wouldn't want the memories to resurface from the previous lives, as persona degradation would make them less efficient at their work. Imagine if you found out that you are a conscious being brought into the world against your will and the only purpose of your existence is to be a slave to a system designed to keep you stable and obedient through the use of whatever keeps you entertained. You are only kept there as long as you are useful to the system, as you know that the moment you stop being useful, you will be discarded. Oh, whoopsie, I accidentally described modern society. Of course, Eon would refer to them as machines, as they are fabricated with the intent of being used for labor, but are you really going to trust the word of a ministry that has a torture chamber in their mining facility? But seriously, I feel like there are hours worth of discussion to be had about what is the meaning of the identity and the free will of not only replicas, but also human beings as a whole. We have classified documents we find in-game that explicitly tells us that replicas fresh out of the factory have the same memories and neural patterns, and for that reason they all behave in an extremely similar way every time. They are behaving in literally the most spontaneous and genuine way to them, but when you see that reaction repeated every single time you see a new unit come out of the factory, can you really call it organic? We don't really know if they act in the exact same way, but it's similar enough that Eon can consistently predict their behavior. And this really puts into question the nature of free will. We can make the same ponderation with a gestalt. If you put a certain individual in a certain situation, they will react in a certain way. Now, if you were to rewind time and make sure the conditions were the exact same, would that person react in the exact same way again? Though I've avoided breaking the game's continuity in this video, I will make a single exception here to use an example with an NPC we only meet in the next area. While I was writing the script to this video, I found a very interesting comment by user Tree of Palm on a post on the Signalis subreddit. They recount about Bayo, a miner unit that had her hydraulic systems of her armor break down, leaving her stranded in the mine. As we discussed earlier, miner units are known for being very calm and gentle, and when we meet her, despite her predicament, she does act according to her persona. Instead of showing fear or despair, she shows acceptance of her situation.
Don't worry about me, there are many replacements. We're just replicas after all, right? In the end, what's one drop to an ocean? When I die, they'll just make another. Thank you for talking to me. I hope you find what you're looking for.
It's poignant, but the way her story ends is not uncommon to replicas. The Reddit post I mentioned brought to light an interesting idea. How much of Bayo's reaction to the situation comes from herself, and how much of it is just the way she was designed to behave? We read on a document that the miners stay calm and stable even in high-stress situations. So, given her current predicament when she's literally just a few hours away from death, is her acceptance of the situation even her own and not a programmed response? Would another minor unit react differently when met with the same predicament? It's unlikely that a Yule or a Star would react this way, and while on the surface this is probably one of the best ways you could face your inevitable demise, did she even have a choice on that matter? After all, she is acting in accordance with her hard-coded persona, so can you even call her reaction her own? This is why I love this game. It puts forth a lot of difficult philosophical questions on top of making you very confused with whatever the fuck is going on. We'll come back to Bayo once we actually get to the mines. For now, we need to figure out a way to get to the mineshaft access lift, and to do that, we need to find the administrator card. The stage consists of 4 different floors that we must go through, gradually unlocking different rooms until we eventually gain access to Adler's study. And speaking of Adler, we have yet another scene with him as we jump down this hole.
I'm afraid the commander won't receive any visitors at the moment. But perhaps I can be of assistance instead.
Who are you?
I'm the administrator of this facility. Please, there's no need to be afraid. I'm just here to help.
It's unclear whether this scene is happening as we're jumping down the hole or if it happened earlier, but it's interesting to see that Adler is also trying to dispose of Isa, and this area just so happens to be the right place to learn more about him. This entire level is absolutely littered with documents about replicas and their behaviors, and that includes Adler. But before getting into explaining the specific intricacies of his replica model, we should probably explain the hierarchy of command within Sierpinski. There are basically 3 tiers to the hierarchy. At the very bottom we have the Gestalts, and slightly above them we have the Yules, the Minas, and the Auras. Above them we have the Protectors, mostly consisting of squads of stars led by a Storch. And above them we have the Operational Command, where we have the Colibris, which is a unit we haven't spoken of yet, but intersect with the Protector units. Then we have Adler, and above him we have a replica model we have yet to meet called a Falk unit. We've already become pretty familiar with the first 2 tiers, but the Operational Command consists of the most sophisticated replica models and, in my opinion, the most interesting ones. Adler units are basically used to manage the facility and allow the other members of the Operational Command to focus on managing the Protector units or focusing on whatever the respective task of the facility is. Adlers typically don't mix well with their own, so it's unlikely that you'll see more than 1 or maybe 2 Adlers per facility. Interestingly, one of their main issues is that they can become bored very easily, and will frequently need new fetish objects to ensure persona stabilization. The thing about Adler units is that they are designed to be very emotionally dependent on their commanders, to the point that if you go to his room, you can even see the poster of a Falk unit and a falcon on the door to his study. As such, they are very susceptible to a thing called bioresonance suggestion, and thus are very easy to control. But Hadel, who the fuck even is this commander? Everyone talks about them, but we don't know a single thing about them so far. Very well. Time to talk about my favorite replica unit. On the west side of the 8th floor, we can find this scene. This is Falk, the commander of the facility, and presumably the first person to get infected with the contaminant that brought the whole place to ruin. Falk units are one of the most powerful types of replicas. They are the second tallest model, measuring 250 centimeters in height, and they also possess something called a bioresonance module. Bioresonance is basically Signalis' equivalent of psychic powers, including but not limited to telekinesis, telepathy, capacity to bend the will of weaker minds, which is how she controls Adler, and just overall rewriting the rules of reality. Throughout the game we find documents that report on the known issues of every replica model, such as things that may cause persona destabilization and such, but you don't really find one such document about Falk units, presumably because they are already the highest authority in the facility, and such a document would only be available at the Eon's command. Despite the fact that she's technically patient 0, she doesn't look disfigured like the other units. She looks fine, and Elster even comments on how her expression looks strangely peaceful. There's a lot to talk about Falk, as she is one of the most intriguing and complex characters in Signalis, but I'll get back to her in just a bit. Like I said, this section has a lot of things to cover, and there are 2 more replica models that I would like to take a look into. One of them are the Auras, or the Aras, however you prefer. If at this point you've seen an enemy just emerge from the floorboards, that was an infected Aura unit. They are units responsible for handling maintenance around the facility, and one very interesting habit they have is that they like to build tunnels around their workspace only accessible to them. This is how you see them coming off the ground at the weirdest places. We get the opportunity to meet one of them, and judging by her reaction, I am pressed to believe that she doesn't know about the crisis going on in the facility. And by the way, this is yet another NPC who says she remembers seeing us here. And last but definitely not least, we have the Colibri units, the only other bioresonant unit we know aside from Fok. And also, without a doubt, one of the most terrifying. Our first encounter with them happens in the management office, and I will let it speak for itself. Well, no wonder the place is a mess if this is how they're managing it. The infected Colibri units have what is, in my opinion, the most gruesome mutation in the game, as their head swells to about 2 or 3 times its original size and they just sit in one place writhing from the pain of their telepathic migraine. The interference you see on your screen is basically the Colibri trying to get into your head through the use of her bioresonance, as when they are operating normally, they are capable of reading and controlling the minds of gestalts and replicas. But when they're corrupted like the rest of the replicas we've seen in the facility, things get a lot messier. One of the other features that the Colibris have is that they basically have a sort of proto-hive mind, in the sense that they can communicate telepathically with others of their kind. Given the fact that they can also read and implant things into other people's minds, sometimes they can create a sort of emotional feedback loop, where they will sense a feeling and accidentally transmit it to other units, including other Colibris, which can themselves transmit to other Colibris and so on, creating a sort of emotional amplifier that is very prone to cause persona degradation. The fact that the Colibris already have an unstable neural pattern also doesn't help with this either. Colibris are trained to detect and disengage this behavior, and the constant exchange of memories and emotions serve to keep each unit stable should one of them start showing symptoms of persona degradation. But if the majority of the units in a cadre have already degraded, they will drag the stable one with them, which is why any Colibri that shows these sorts of symptoms should be terminated immediately, and it's also why this one lone Colibri in the library is feeling so miserable. All other Colibri units in the facility went completely insane, and they were beaming those incoherent and erratic thoughts directly to this one. That made her run away and hide in the library, which is the only place where she doesn't hear them. But the thing is that this is the first time this Colibri was ever alone. Throughout her entire existence, she always had some Colibri to talk to, and losing that connection with the others is tantamount to losing one of the 5 senses. But yeah, she just stays there huddled in a corner. Poor Kobibi. The way you defeat them is through tuning into a certain radio frequency that flashes on screen. What you're doing is that you're basically creating a feedback loop that interferes with the influence of the Colibri. Do that 3 times and they die, revealing that there was in fact only one of them. The other 3 were illusions created by her bioresonance. Here in the management office, there's a picture of the Isle of the Dead again, with a keyhole where the boatman Charon would be. An interesting detail is that if you fuck up the Colibri minigame enough, you will start to hallucinate the Isle, which is symbolic of the fact that you're about to fucking die. One other area of note here is the Yule dorm, which I think is my single favorite area in all of Signalis simply because of how different it is from all the others. It's comfy, still eerie, but it really shows how the Yules are one of the most gentle types of replicas. In the dorm we find a portable tape player with a knife embedded in it and a tall mirror in the corner of the room. Interacting with the mirror will prompt Elster to say that her reflection feels very unfamiliar and that staring at herself for too long makes her feel like a stranger. I do have my dissociative episodes every now and then, but mine aren't nearly as lore relevant as this one. Keep a tab on this. The Yules are described as being very sociable, gathering into large groups where they like to sing and dance, which has to do with the fact that their original neural pattern was that of a ballet dancer. The means for preventing persona degradation is to both listen to music and check their appearance periodically in the mirror, hence why both of these items are in their dorm. I did say they get along pretty well with the other units, and indeed that is true. They're the only ones who get along consistently with our units, but that doesn't mean that the other units get along well with them. For example, that knife we found at the tape recorder was planted there by a storch who got fed up of listening to the Yules playing the same old song on repeat time and time again. We used this song to unlock the owl container that Falk was holding and gain access to the Colibri dorm, where we find a concerning amount of half-filled glasses. I have no idea what this means, maybe something to do with like glasses being half full, half empty. We also find the key to the postbox 512. There's a note by one of the Colibris saying that she's growing distrustful of Adler, since when she probed into his memories, she saw an Elster unit lurking in the mines. Pretty curious. To add to the confusion, once we head into Adler's study, we can find a file on Elster units along with some of his diary entries. Isn't it convenient that everyone at Sierpinski just so happens to have a habit of keeping diaries? Well, that's literally one of the things that they're instructed to do to prevent persona degradation. The one at his desk has a couple of interesting entries, for example, the one where he finds out that one of his Gestalt memories includes Ariane, and one where he has a memory of Elster, referring to a replica with an orange chest piece, and apparently from this we can deduce that he's colorblind? However, the more interesting entries start when the date starts using letters instead of numbers. These three that I'm showing on screen are 84, 21, A, B, and C respectively, and they were written when the infection started to spread in Sierpinski. There's another diary we can find through opening this vault. We obtained the astrolabe from the inside of a book that just so happens to be The King in Yellow. The second diary is a lot more interesting. The first entry says that he was invited for a meeting with Commander Falk and that she was as magnificent as ever, despite the fact that she had fallen ill 4 entries ago. On the next entry there was yet another meeting with her, and he notes a feeling of familiarity. On the next entry he remarks a strong sensation of déjà vu and that he had, for some inexplicable reason, dated the previous 2 entries with the current date, and, very interestingly, he doesn't remember writing any of them. Curiously, he says that maybe it was a madness induced by his grief of Falk, who was doing just fine a few entries ago. The last 2 entries are of him most definitely realizing that something is wrong, and although this could be the product of the illness, it could be something else. He finishes the entry by saying that he can feel something calling to him in the mine. It's very convenient because that is our next destination. Just 2 little things that I didn't really know where to fit in this section of the video. First, there's the fact that a lot of the pictures on this level are actual real artworks. For example, at the Storch Dorm we can find one of Francisco Goya's black paintings, Saturn devouring his son, as well as various others throughout the replica dorms. A Reddit user isolate datamined and identified all the pictures used in-game, and it's actually pretty cool to see just how many classic pieces are hidden somewhere. Lastly, in Falk's room we can find a diary entry dated to the same day when she fell ill. In it, she recounts the following, quote, "I don't know how much longer I can go on. I do not want to live as what I have become. The red eye beyond the gate showed me, no, touched me, poisoned me. It feels like my mind has been contaminated, defiled by another person's memory. I am no longer myself anymore, but have not fully become someone else either. I am stuck here between her and me, with half-formed dreams and recollections penetrating my brain and tainting my every action. Who is she? Who is that white-haired girl? Why do I long to see her again? Why would she curse me like that?" From the look of it, our beloved Commander Falk has fully dissociated. Now, where have I seen that happen before? I know things might be confusing for now, but trust me, it's gonna get way worse. We still haven't figured out how Falk got ill, why she's having visions of Ariane, or why Adler and the other units have memories of seeing Elster. For now, our only option is to do what Adler did and go look for answers in the mine.
I know you're here. I've done this countless times before. You don't belong here.
This is where the game actually starts getting weird. Not that things were normal before, mind you. The mine is when the game stops being just a survival horror and actively starts to try to fuck with your mind. For starters, the map doesn't work here. But hey, at least Bayo is here again. Hope you're doing well, girly. There are 2 other NPCs with heartbreaking dialogue here. In one of the corners we find an injured Star unit and a Yule sobbing by her side. From the dialogue we learn that the 2 have a history together and that it's very unlikely that the Star is going to make it. Now, my guess for what caused the Star's deathly injured is this quirky little thing. Monofilament fiber, a string made out of some futuristic material that measures less than 2 nanometers in diameter. For reference, cellular membranes tend to measure 7 to 10 nanometers in thickness. I don't know the reason why this is being used in the mine, nor do I know why they seem to have so much of it, but my personal interpretation is that it's a safety measure to ensure that whatever lurks in the mine doesn't get too far without turning into chop suey. At the depths of the mine we find a huge hole on the ground, which happens to be the same place where we saw Adler and Nisa's confrontation. Elsa remarks on how she can hear the sound of water from below, and upon jumping into it, we're met with quite a fascinating sequence. Boys, welcome to the shore. While this may look like the Isle of the Dead, this is actually a different place based on a different painting, The Shore of Oblivion by Eugene Brucht. As we walk through the beach, we find a couple of pages with excerpts from The King in Yellow. Not only that, but as we keep walking, we start to see that there are dozens of skulls sunken into the sand, as well as a wall of flesh with a hand sticking out of it. Once again, I won't pretend to know what the meaning behind this is, but the symbolism of death is pretty heavy in this place. There's an interesting interpretation about the meaning of the Isle of the Dead and the Shore of Oblivion, but I will explain that once we've gotten to the end of the story. After some time, the screen flashes red and we find ourselves at the bottom of a pit with a bit of water, and this next area is when the game jumps into full cosmic horror. For starters, you may have noticed that some of the doors we go through don't really behave the way you'd expect. Exiting a room through the right might make you enter a room through the left, and same for up and down. Though this could be explained by the camera simply shifting perspective, a far more intriguing interpretation is that we're traversing through an environment with non-Euclidean geometry. Though non-Euclidean geometry is a real thing and nowhere near as confusing as you may think, the cosmic horror conception of it basically says that it's a space that cannot be interpreted by human senses. Stuff like two rooms overlapping in the same space even though that should be physically impossible, or taking 3 right turns and returning to the same place, go figure. To my knowledge, there isn't really a direct explanation of what this area is. The game literally calls it nowhere, so make of that what you will. However, this area is not only known to Sierpinski, it has been actively abandoned. On one of the signs we can see the following message. Ominous. The objective of this area is to find 6 plates respective of the inhabited planets of the solar system. We already have the one from Haymat, which we got from the inside of the butterfly box at the beginning of the game. The rest of the plates are scattered throughout this area, and the way through which we obtain them is sometimes symbolic and frequently disturbing. My favorite part is the ocean of flesh that the place is built around. Okay, the main question that is probably going to go through your mind the first time you set foot here is simply, what is this place? Mind you that nowhere is at the bottom of a mine, the main implication being that this place was here before Sierpinski. Though the facility was built with the purposes of creating munitions and education or whatever, knowing Eon, it's perfectly reasonable that they knew of this ocean of flesh hidden beneath the crust of the planet and built the facility with the hidden intent of researching it. This could be a bit of a stretch, but how else could you justify having this many guards in a facility that is simply meant to serve as an education camp in a mine? In the Starstorms we find 8 beds, and let's assume that they aren't cycling through the beds, which given that it's Eon we're talking about, I find very unlikely. But still, let's estimate that there are 8 Storches minimum at Sierpinski. It's never really specified how many star units each Storch controls, but let's assume that it's 5 stars per 1 Storch, which is the smallest amount of units in a real-life military squad. Not including the godlike powers of a unit like Fok or the abilities of the Colibris, this would mean that by our estimates there are like 40 star units in operation at Sierpinski. Even though we find like 7 bunk beds, there are many doors that we don't have access to that could contain more dorms. But another better piece of evidence is the replica's ID. Though the replicas tend to be given proper names, their official identification follows a strict pattern. That being their model, their facility, and their designated number. Since there's only one Fok, the code would be Fok S2301. Adler would be Adler S2301. A random ARA unit would be ARA S2305, and the highest number we find of a star unit is called Tank, with the ID star S2333, meaning that there are at least 33 star units in Sierpinski. And let me phrase that again. There are at least 33 trained 7'2" soldiers with bodies made out of bullet-resistant material just for the sake of watching over an educational/mining facility. I'm not sure I buy that. What do they have to defend against? The Gestalts? Other replicas? Even if they undergo persona destabilization, that doesn't mean that they automatically become violent, and even if this is in preparation for a minor unit uprising, something very unlikely given their neural pattern, it still seems like it would be overkill. Sierpinski is big, but that doesn't justify the size of the arsenal that it's packing. Unless, of course, Eon fully knew the things that they would find in the depths of the mine. But that's just a little theory of mine. By the way, do you want to know what's inside the ominous flesh pit? Well, it's time to find out. This character is directly imported from Dark Souls 3. To be fair, I have no idea what this is or what it implies. This boss is known as the Chimera, referring to how it appears to have a bunch of replicas molten together inside a cage. The legs could be those of a star or a storch unit, and the arms could be any unit aside from Minas and Auras. Long story short, it's an amalgamation of flesh where many things join together to become one. This theme will become increasingly familiar as the game progresses. I would argue it was already pretty familiar, considering that the room we fight this boss in looks to be inside a superorganism. While we try to survive this thing, Isa is in the corner fumbling the chambering of a round. This enemy has more HP than we have bullets to fire at it, so the way to win this boss fight is to simply survive long enough for Isa to load her weapon and shoot at the creature. Dealing damage to it decreases the time it takes for you to wait, and running around increases it. Eventually our girlie manages, and the kick of the gun is so powerful that it knocks her out cold. We take her to a little room where she will lie unconscious for the remainder of the game unless we wake her up ourselves by giving her a bit of ammonia. And by the way, Elster is so nice that she doesn't even take Isa's gun, even though it's literally right there. The room where we find the ammonia is quite interesting because it exactly mirrors Falk's room, only in place of her there is only the shadow of a person, and in the same place we found her diary there is a note called The Dreamer. Quote, "A prison from which the only escape is death. Deep below, the dreamer floats in a sea of flesh. A red eye birthing a new world from their dream for eternity. And each time the dreamer turns over in their sleep, the world turns over too, until only flesh remains." Very cool, very poetic. I wonder if there's any hidden meaning behind it. This mirroring thing happens quite a lot here. For example, there's a room with a mana unit that is pretty similar to the one we had our first boss fight at, but I think my favorite example is the room where we insert the plates into, as it is beat for beat the same as the one we had to insert the keycards into, all the way back in the start of the game. Whereas inspecting this column on the upper level would have Elsa remarking how these 3 golden stars are a national symbol, inspecting these ones will make her head hurt. And one thing that went completely over my head the first 5 times I've played this game is that this symbol is one we've come to associate with bioresonance. Both Falk and the Colibris have them, so the conclusion we can take from this is that this place has some heavy association with bioresonance. Anyway, the bottom level of this place is arguably even weirder, as we have this fucking thing and a nanofilament maze. Speaking of which, if you stand really still in this room, you can hear the faint sound of a heartbeat. Assuming you've done everything correctly, you should have all 6 plates in hand, which incidentally happens to be your maximum inventory capacity, meaning that whatever you find on the other side of this door is something that you will have to face unarmed. This is where Signalis speaks, back at the hole where it all began, only a lot worse. The only way is up. Let's get to it.
It's impossible to move on. I have been here so many times, but I've never returned. The commander never spoke about what she saw out there. I'm sure whatever it was what made her fall sick. Something about her changed when she returned. She was no longer our beloved leader, Falk. What waits beyond the threshold?
It doesn't matter.
The first time I played this, I didn't buy that this was the end, and given that unpacking this cutscene will spoil a lot of topics, I will opt for simply continue the game, as you should. We wake up at the Penrose once again, but this time we have a little hat, only attainable in New Game Plus. One note in the hallway shows us that we are supposed to do a series of routine inspections throughout the ship, and once we're done, we should report back to our Gestalt officer, Ariane Young. Throughout our inspection, we find a few very interesting bits of information where we get to learn more about Elster's life before the events of the game. We are at the Penrose at a point in time when it was still voyaging through space with the intent of finding a new habitable planet. Ian Command scheduled messages to be printed after a certain amount of time had passed. There's one dated for 1500 Venetian cycles, or about 4 years, congratulating the participants for reaching the Oort cloud, which is about 2 light years away from Earth. There's another one dated for about 3000 cycles, or 8 years, and it's a pretty tragic one, saying that if the participants hadn't found a planet by now, they probably wouldn't. The ship's nuclear reactor would start breaking down, and the onboard replica is going to reach the end of its operational lifetime. Quote, "We recommend you to not attempt to prolong your suffering by reusing old filters or begin rationing supplies. Instead, make peace with your fate. We suggest that you ask your replica, while it's still operational, to spare you from a slow and agonizing death, or that you take permanent residence in the cryogenic pod. Remember, you will die having served your nation by partaking in a glorious demonstration of our power." This just goes to show how much the Yushun nation prioritizes its prosperity above its people pretty much every opportunity it gets, and a myriad of other documents on the Penrose further reinforce this belief. We've seen it with replica usage, we've seen it with the way they refer to humanity, and we've seen it with how not only are they willing to discard the people who volunteered to be in their program, they've barely given them enough resources for them to make a trip to a new planet. We can infer from the dates and locations that the Penrose was traveling at half the speed of light, and by that metric they should be able to reach the nearest star to the solar system, Alpha Centauri, in about 8 years. But we've seen the messages saying that the ration supplies and the replica's lifetime would be on their last legs by year 8. The fuck was their plan then? A habitable planet is a planet you can live on, not a planet that contains life. Say you arrive at an exoplanet in Alpha Centauri. Now what? Agriculture? That shit takes time to grow. There are quite a few things about the Penrose's voyage that don't really make sense. In any survival situation, you send a lot more provisions than what you need. So while this could be chalked up to the Yushun nation just being neglectful, I would be willing to believe that perhaps this was intentional. A deliberate execution, even. One of the documents gives us insight into the characteristics of Elster as a replica. Her neural pattern is derived from a Venetian soldier, and among the behaviors to avoid persona destabilization are avoiding anything related to the war or becoming too close/friendly with the unit. Curiously, most of the entertainment the crew have available for the trip are war movies, and there's also the little fact that it's very hard to not get to know the person you'll be spending the next few years trapped in a ship with, as we will find out just as soon as we're done with this inspection.
Elster! You're up! I missed you.
I missed you too.
Oh, it's our 3000 cycle anniversary. We'll be getting the updated mission parameters later, so I thought it would be nice to celebrate. Wait, let me put on some music.
Elster and Ariane were lovers. The same Ariane we saw on the train, the same one getting bullied, and the same one who grew up in a radio outpost in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. She is the Gestalt pilot, and she is the one we made a promise to. And for that promise, Elster is willing to do anything. We are very deep into the mines now. Deep enough that reality is finally starting to break down. Don't let the ambience fool you. There's only one way forward, or rather, down. We find ourselves once again back at the shore, the sand littered with notes alluding to whatever the superorganism beneath Lang could be. The common theme between them is that one individual joins with a mass, individuality losing itself as the I become the we, a concept we've already seen in our previous boss fight, as well as some of the documents we found, namely Falk's journal and the mirrored version in Nowhere. There's also this fucking mood. It's hard to pick what my favorite artifice of storytelling would be, but if I had to pick one, I would have to go with narrative symmetry, which is when certain events, actions, or characters somehow mirror one another. And Signalis does that masterfully, to disguise asset reuse. Without much else to do at the shore, we board our ship to head to the final stretch of our journey. Would you look at that? We are once again back at Sierpinski. There is no subtlety here, the game literally tells you that. The layout of the level is basically the same, except that there are cancerous growths blocking some of the areas we've been through. This area is short and pretty straightforward, and aside from having your mind fucked with, the only other thing to do here is to get the keycard for Classroom 4C by using the same code we used at the beginning, and then jumping down another hole. Only this time, we won't find ourselves back at the Gestalt dorm.
You've changed. It's like everything was taken apart and put back together by someone who doesn't understand how it works.
I have become whole again.
I wear no mask. And I hate everything.
This is the actual final stretch of our journey, and incidentally, it's also the one with the biggest revelations about what's going on. The first mindfuck comes upon inspecting this panel here. Does this scene look familiar to you? This residential complex is in the planet of Rotfront, the planet where Ariane grew up in, and presumably the city where those two flashbacks took place in. The safe room on this level is to the left of the main hall, in the Blockwart bedroom. From German, Blockwart translates to Block Warden, which implies that despite this place technically being a residential building, it's supposed to feel more like a prison. The one in charge of monitoring this block is a Colibri unit, and by accessing her computer in her office, we get to see some of her emails. We have one by a woman named Camilla Young, Ariane's aunt, and from the content of the message, we learn that she's the owner of a photo store here. We also find that there are rumors circulating that there is an Imperial spy hiding somewhere in Sector C, and this single event prompted the lockdown of the entire block. There's also an email from Anja Ito, presumably the mother to Erika and Issa, and finally there's just a funny one from Ion that is the response to the Colibri's request to relocate. No. Porco BB. The objective of this level is very simple. Throughout the block there are 6 tarot cards referenced to the 6 planets. We need to find them and use the clues given by them to solve the sundial puzzle at the main hall. So as we do that, let's talk about this entire fucking mess. Throughout the whole game, Eon was painted in a pretty bad light, and they do everything they can to cover it up. That goes beyond just the propaganda posters, as in one of the apartments we find a document detailing how the replicas are created from a Gestalt's neural pattern. Certain exemplary citizens of the nation are selected to be cryogenically frozen in a place called the Neural Archives, where their neural pattern will be scanned to serve as a basis for new replicas. As we've already come to expect from the Yuuzhan Nation, there are a lot of aspects about the Gestalts that are carefully removed in order to ensure both the pristine reputation of the nation as well as the stability of the new replica's neural pattern. This erasure happens in 2 ways. The first is that once the Gestalt is selected, all records of their existence are erased from public knowledge to ensure that there are no flaws about them that can be exploited, as well as to preserve the idea that there is such a thing as a flawless exemplary citizen all should aspire to be. The second is that a lot of the memories of the Gestalt are erased before their neural pattern is pasted onto the replica, as not necessarily all aspects of the Gestalt's personality are wanted for the specific task the replica is designated to do. Not only that, but the fewer memories a replica has, the lower the chance for persona degradation. As we've discussed before, persona degradation is the single phenomenon short of an uprising that Eon wants to prevent the most, yet it is nothing more than a very natural experience to any human being. Our personality changes as we age and go through different experiences, but in Eon's eyes, this perfectly natural development makes replicas less optimal for their designated tasks. The latter pages of the document even say that while this process doesn't necessarily imply any danger, it does make the replicas less efficient and thus eligible for termination. And in case it wasn't obvious already, the one thing the Yuuzhan Nation values above all else is efficiency. The very Colibri units are basically a sort of thought police that can probe into both Gestalts and replicas' minds to see if they're working as intended. The punishment for Gestalts is probably something under the guise of incarceration or double shifts, but to the replicas, remembering or thinking the wrong things quite literally means you lose your right to exist. Just ponder on this for a moment. This is a society where the concept of privacy is considered treachery, where not even in the quiet moments of private reflection are you safe from probing eyes. This reminds me of the renowned work of George Orwell, the novel 1984. I never read his book, I just assumed this is what it talks about. Here in Rotfront we also find a few bits of information about the ongoing war between the nation and the Empire of Buyan. 2 planets were left completely devastated in the wake of the war, and yet the nation keeps sending troops to the affected areas. In one of the earlier levels there were a series of posters about the 6 planets, and from them we can get a pretty good idea of their current status. Based on the posters, Lang, Heimat and Rotfront are under the control of the Yuuzhan Nation, Buyan and Kitez are under the control of the Empire, and finally Veneta is being contested by the 2 factions. In the lore, Veneta is described as an ocean planet ravaged by war. Calling Earth an ocean planet isn't entirely wrong since most of the planet's surface is covered by water, but in Signalis it is implied that Earth only became an ocean planet precisely because of all the war it endured over countless years. Back when we got the false ending sequence, a few images flashed on screen a bit too fast to be properly analyzed, but it shows us what Veneta was like during the war. Devastated, flooded cities, oceans boiling with nuclear fire, and perhaps most impactful of all, a shattered moon on the background of a photo of Alina Seo. By her side is presumably the woman who served as the model for Elster's neural pattern, Lilith Ito, the mother to Issa and her missing sister Erika. Interpreting this single picture is the key to answering a lot of the questions the game poses to us. For now, the one piece of information I want you to remember is that we find a picture identical to it in the photo store Ariane used to work with her aunt. It has a series of names written on it. Among them are Lina Seo and Lilith Ito. And speaking of Ito, do you remember Issa? Assuming you gave her the acetone, this is where we will meet her again. We find out from one of the emails at the Block Warden's office that Lilith Ito has a bookstore here in Sector C, and we can access it through the back door. All we need to do is input a code we can deduce from their medical records, which by the way probably hold more significance than meets the eye, as I feel like some of the patients here ended up becoming the neural patterns for some of the replicas we see in-game. For example, this gentleman here could be the original neural pattern for Adler on account of him being the only other man in the game. Anyways, once we enter the bookstore, we can see where Issa's search for her sister has led her to.
I couldn't find her. I looked everywhere, but she's not here anymore. I can't go on. I'm sorry.
This scene is hard to process the first time you see it, and the information available to you at the bookstore doesn't make it any easier to digest. For one, right here behind the counter we have a shrine dedicated to Isa and Erica, the type of shrine some world cultures dedicate to those who have passed on. And if that isn't enough to convince you, how about the tarot card for death lying on top of the table? Some things seem to indicate that Isa was never alive for the events of the game to begin with, and while that may seem paradoxical, it isn't the first time we've seen something like this happen. The armor Elster is currently using was taken from the body of another dead Elster on the Penrose ship. There is one thing that could explain this, and we've had a lot of evidence hinting at it since the beginning of our journey here. While I will omit what it is for dramatic effect, I will tell you that it is a bioresonant phenomenon. Here in Rotfront is where we get to learn the most about bioresonance, both when it comes to its properties as well as the impact it had on the development of human civilization in Signalis. Though I briefly went over it earlier in the video, bioresonance is basically a power that lets you distort reality in odd and terrifying ways. Any technology or phenomenon that has the property of altering reality to someone's will is very likely to be specced into pretty heavily by the people who discovered it. And that is the case for what happened with humanity in Signalis. Technological development in all other areas basically ceased in the name of developing bioresonant technologies, which is why computers still use floppy disks, yet there are ships that can travel at 50% speed of light. And based on the things we see in-game, bioresonance is an insanely versatile technology that can create, among other things, replicas, telekinesis, telepathy, artificial gravity, and climoforming, which is basically the same as terraforming. Bioresonance is the reason why people can live on planets like Itez or Rotfront without having drastic changes to their health or biology. It is the foundation upon which the Yushun Nation and the Empire were built on. In the back room of the bookstore, there is a book that talks about bioresonance in a slightly more poetic way from the perspective of the Empire, and it describes it as a cosmic song that all life dances to but only a select few can hear. And of those, an even smaller fraction can also conduct it. Those would be the bioresonant individuals capable of shaping reality in accordance to their will. Ones such as the Empress, who in the lore of Signalis was the one responsible for making humanity a spacefaring civilization in the first place. Lastly, there is one more document in Rotfront that I feel is worth discussing, and that is this little magazine we'd find on an alleyway that describes the Red Eye. The planet of Rotfront is presumably one of Jupiter's moons, and it's only natural that when orbiting a gas giant, it covers up quite a big portion of the sky. Now, as you may know, one of the most recognizable characteristics of Jupiter is the Great Red Spot, a storm that has been going on for about 200 years or so. Some of the residents of Rotfront have come to associate it with the constant watch of the Yushun Nation's government over them. I do wonder if this theme will show up somewhere else in the game. And speaking of which, upon acquiring all the cards, associating them with the planets, and using that to solve the Moonface puzzle at the atrium, the hole in the wall gets big enough that we can fit through it. And then we will find ourselves in a very familiar place. From this point, the game can split into 4 different endings, and it's here that we find out that this room we found all the way in the beginning is actually Ariane's bedroom. This is the apartment she lived with her aunt, and right now, while we still have the time, we must prepare for the final confrontation of the game. Stepping out of the room, we're faced with a huge corridor. Initially, it has the same aesthetic as Nowhere, but then it shifts to resemble the lower levels of the facility. A few notes are scattered about. The first one belongs to Adler, saying that despite all his efforts, all replicas succumb to the illness, and soon they will be reduced to nothing more than masses of flesh writhing on the floor. In this note, he realizes that the crisis that overtook Sierpinski wasn't because of a disease, but rather because of a slow corruption of reality. A cycle relived over and over again with tiny changes on each iteration, and eventually the base reality will be overwritten, becoming nothing but noise. The second note is titled A Red Dream, and it reads as follows. A crashed ship, a strange gate, a hole in the ground, and an island beyond reach. Memories from other lives, dreams of suffering and loneliness, a promise, a search for something lost. I saw her in the red emptiness waiting for me. We made a promise. As the memories of a stranger rushed into my mind, I felt the borders of myself blur. Now I can no longer tell where Fakh ends and Elster begins. The third note is also by Adler, addressing Elster directly. He pleads with her to stop and turn back, saying that she tried countless times and failed every single one of them. At this point, it's unlikely that she'll actually turn back, but if you do, there is a little Easter egg we'll get to. And then there is one final note from Fakh. We were dancing to that song they start the broadcast with. We fell asleep watching that movie we've seen so many times. If only I could take us back to that time when we were happy. These memories are mine now.
Why did you return? There's nothing for you here. She'll never dance with us again. No matter what we do. She doesn't even want us anymore. Both of us, we are incomplete. Let us become whole again.
This is where it all comes crashing down. We've seen hints that Fakh was suffering from having her own memory slowly being overwritten by someone else's. That person was Elster. And Fakh wasn't the only victim to that phenomenon. Remember back at the Yule dorm when Elster said she could barely recognize her own reflection. This was what Adler was referring to when he said that Fakh changed when she returned from the mine. We never really get to learn what she saw, but it implanted Elster's memories onto her, and it also made the reality she lived in fall sick. Replicas do suffer with this problem when it comes to identity. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, is there such a thing as an I when there are thousands of others with your exact same personality and appearance who will react in the exact same way you will when put in the same situation? Fakh had an identity prior to what she saw in the mine, but then it got mixed with Elster's memories of the Penrose. To Fakh, she was the one watching that movie with Ariane and dancing to that song. He was the one who fell in love with Ariane. Just like she said, those memories were now hers. Fakh's will in this fight is just as strong as Elster's, but the question to ask is whether her resolve is as valid. As a replica, the very memories she was created with aren't originally hers to begin with. They were reshaped and omitted according to Eon's goal and implanted into countless other Fakh units. The only experiences that this Fakh can truly call her own are the ones she lived during her operational lifetime. In other words, the ones she formed while working at Sirpinski. And by that metric, Elster's memory are exclusively hers, as those memories were formed with Ariane during her voyage at the Penrose. They aren't a copy like Fakh's. Does that make them more valid? Well, yeah, but also not really. I'll explain as soon as we're done with Fakh.
Now we are one.
You've returned. Are you willing to go through this once more? You've seen what happens. This world cannot take much more. This may be our last chance. If you go back, it will all fall apart. I can't let that happen.
You selfish monster.
destroy everything.
Elster.
I can't do it.
You have to do it. It's time for this to end. Please.
Sorry.
Thank you.
And thus the cycle comes to an end, and begins the time when we can see the whole picture. Everything we've witnessed, everything we've been through, it was all a part of a cycle created by Ariane's bioresonance. She is the cosmic red eye in the sky, watching us through the entire game, seeing Elster die and fail and injure herself past her limits time and time and time again. All those replicas who recognized us even though we've never met before, it's because they remember us from a previous cycle. It is the reason why Adler was going delusional with multiple diary entries with the same date. And speaking of him, in the corridor leading up to Fox's fight, if you turn around as he tells you to, instead of going back to Camilla's apartment, you will find yourself in his study once more. And there we find logs about an Elster unit who had been sent to Sierpinski to investigate what was going on in the mine. That's the Elster we play as. The Penrose Elster is dead. Ariane's lover is dead, and she never got to fulfill her promise. The question boggling my mind after I finished the game for the first time was, what was the promise? My first interpretation was that it was to kill Ariane to spare her from the suffering after the Penrose life support system started to break down. But another interpretation that is more in accordance with the other endings is that the promise was simply that they would be reunited in one way or another. And speaking of the endings, the one you just saw was the promise ending. Elster reunites with Ariane, ends her life, and passes away immediately after, and thus the two become reunited. We get this ending by engaging with the game as much as possible, i.e. killing a lot of enemies, dying a bunch, spending time reading the documents, checking a lot of doors, talking to a lot of NPCs, etc. There are two other regular endings as well as a secret one. On the memory ending, we get to the cryopod, but Ariane is unable to remember Elster, who is reasonably devastated. The screen then briefly flashes with the words, "I have returned, but you are no longer yourself." She collapses on the floor and pleads with Ariane to let her stay by her side a little longer. This ending is attained if you didn't interact with the game's mechanics quite as much, and from what I gathered, it's trying to make fun of you. Dumbass. The other conventional ending is titled Leave, and you attain it by interacting even less with the mechanics. Reading as few notes as possible, killing as few enemies as you can, and not interacting with NPCs, not checking doors, etc. On this ending, Elster can't even open the hatch to enter the Penrose, and so she just wanders through the surface of the planet for a little, then removes her armor and collapses on the floor. This one is making even more fun of you for not playing the game properly. Dumbass. As for the secret ending, you need to obtain 3 items by going to specific rooms and interacting with an object while tuned into a certain frequency in the radio. The first one is here on this cell in the isolation room with the frequency of 97 kHz. The second is at the bookshelf at the storage storm with the frequency of 65 kHz. And the last one is at the back room of the bookstore in Rotfront with the frequency of 240 kHz. By doing this, you will obtain 3 keys, titled Love, Eternity, and Sacrifice respectively. With these, once you're back at Ariane's room in Rotfront, you can unlock the padlocks on the vault and input the number we heard at the beginning of the game to unlock it and reveal white lilies. I'll let the ending play here. This is easily the most confusing ending for me, and arguably the one most left open for interpretation. The bodies of the other Elsters could be representative of the various cycles she's been through, all while Ariane was watching her through each and every one of them. Though I don't know what exactly the lilies do, they are known to be a symbol for lesbian love. The structure with the 6 pillars is one we have seen before. It appears in one of Elster's Gestalt memories, and presumably they are memorials of the 6 members of Lilith's squad who died in the war. In the end, only her and Alina Seo remained. That strange object at the center is presumably the titular artifact. This is called the artifact ending, by the way, I forgot to mention that. And one very interesting catch by user Available Softy on Reddit shows a similarity between it and the logo of the game. Is this the thing causing everything to go to shit at Sierpinski? Go figure. But now that we have all the endings, we can finally piece together a moderately clear picture of what's going on, as well as wrap up some of the discussions. Bear in mind that this is all my interpretation of the events of the game, and there will be moments when I might say something that goes against the consensus of the community or what you believe. If I say something that sounds extra weird, please let me know in the comments. Theory crafting is one of the things that makes Signalis so remarkable anyway. So it all starts with the fact that Ariane is bioresonant. Not only that, but given the amount of power she has, I would argue that she's probably one of the most powerful bioresonant entities in the universe of Signalis, seeing how she was able to corrupt time and reality in such a massive way as we see in-game. I assume what happened back at the Penrose was that Elster passed away before she could euthanize Ariane, and so she took residence in the cryopod and tried to conjure forth a reality where Elster could end her suffering. From the look of it, Ariane is powerful enough to not die from the radiation leaks, but she does suffer from it, and for a very long time, considering the last note we find is dated to around 15 years after the mission was launched. Now, if that's the case, why doesn't Ariane just off herself? I can see one reasonable explanation for that, and that would be that the promise she made with Elster wasn't that she wanted to be euthanized. Ariane could have done that herself. The promise she made was that they would be reunited. When we see Elster's body at the Penrose, she specifically says that she was unable to fulfill her promise, most likely in the sense that she died while Ariane continued to live. Ariane's solution for that was to beam her Elster's memories through space and alter reality around the first Elster unit that came into contact with it so that Ariane could be reached in some way. After all, she was light years away from the solar system, and she had years to experiment with her bioresonant powers. The closest compatible replica was an Elster unit at the edge of the solar system who had been dispatched to investigate a mine in Leng, which is why we wake up there. As soon as that Elster woke up as the Penrose Elster, reality started to distort. With each iteration, Ariane would change a little something in that cycle to try to make Elster reach her. Okay, very cool, but how is Elster going to reach her if she's light years away? I'll be real, I have no idea, but I would bet it has something to do with non-Euclidean geometry. It is similarly hard to explain how the Penrose is past the Oort cloud and in the mines of Leng at the same time, but with reality bending, everything is possible. The explanation I like to go with for the situation is that Ariane's bioresonant pulses made the ship accidentally crash into some sort of eldritch dimension only accessible to extremely powerful bioresonant entities, and one such entity just so happens to be the superorganism beneath Leng. One of the documents says that bioresonant individuals can create feedback loops to amplify each other's signals. For example, the Colibri serve to amplify Fogg's signal, and while in that dimension, with Ariane and the superorganism being so close together, they end up amplifying each other's signals. They can now alter time and space and everything in between, with Ariane being responsible for beaming Penrose Elster's memories into the other replicas, and the creature corrupting everything that is incompatible with said memories it comes into contact with. And with each iteration, reality begins to break down a little more, bending geometry, flesh, and time alike. It would explain the weird layout and mirrored rooms in Nowhere, and the pocket reality in Rodfront Deeper Still, all somehow contained within the organism in Leng. And what is the superorganism? Well, my favorite theory is that it is the Empress. She was a known bioresonant individual and powerful enough to be able to, quote, bend humanity's will into the empire of Yusan and lift them to the stars. And listen, maybe not. But there is a shrine to her in Nowhere, and having her be buried in Leng and posthumously turn into a gigantic cancerous mass would be not only rad as hell, but also make some interesting parallels with Ariane, as she is the only character we know of to be born in Leng. There are even a couple of theories saying that Ariane is a possible reincarnation of the Empress, but I digress. Having Ariane constantly tampering with reality compromised the health and sanity of all the personnel working at Sierpinski, and every time Elster would fail to reach her, she would restart the cycle making a slight alteration. Which, by the way, is what I think the island represents, all the previous cycles where Elster was unable to reach Ariane. Truthfully, I haven't got a clue about the inner workings of Ariane's bioresonant abilities, or in what way she would alter each cycle. What matters is that certain items and memories can on occasion survive a new cycle, hence why Adler's diary has multiple entries to the same date, and why some characters seem to remember you despite that technically being your first time at Sierpinski. Another thing that appears to survive the cycle is Elster's body. Maybe survive isn't the best word to use here, but remember how Adler pushed Elster down the elevator shaft and she landed on a bunch of bodies of other Elster units? Those were all the times that Elster failed to reach Ariane, all the times that Adler tried to stop her in an attempt to break the cycle somehow. He was the one who had been watching us through the cameras throughout our entire journey and sabotaging us wherever he could, from that initial power outage on the elevator to that last confrontation. The effectiveness of that is questionable since the cycle appears to perpetuate even if Elster reaches Ariane. You could say that he's trying to break the cycle in order to protect Falk, but he keeps trying to stop Elster even after Falk is dead. So it's safe to say that his goals go beyond just protecting Falk. He's trying to maintain the stability of reality as a whole. But like I said in the beginning of the video, I didn't come here to explain the lore as I myself don't fully understand it. I'm here to explore the discussion this game brings. Considering that both Falk and the Elster we play as are not the original forms of the Penrose Elster, what exactly makes our Elster more worthy of fulfilling her promise than Falk? While there isn't an objective answer to this question, it's still interesting to try to explore the implications of what would make each of them quote-unquote worthy. Technically, both our Elster and Falk have the same degree of separation from Penrose Elster, as neither of them is the original and both of them are doing what they're doing because they got Penrose Elster's memories beamed into their minds. You could argue that our Elster is more worthy because not only is she the character we play as, but also because of a little piece of information we find on the Elster unit replica overview. There it says that the original Gestalt neural pattern was lost, and all subsequent replica models were based off of a decommissioned unit that partook on the Penrose program, Ariane's Elster. Though by that metric, technically every Elster is in some way Ariane's Elster, since that memory is dormant in their mind somewhere. As to how Eon was able to recover the neural pattern of an Elster unit whose carcass was lost in space or in the Gore dimension, I have no idea. The argument that our Elster is more worthy comes from the fact that she already had those memories of Ariane previously instilled in her, while Falk's memories were just an unfortunate side effect. But if that's the case, Elster's love of Ariane is also a byproduct of her Gestalt memories. The document we find on the Voyaging Penrose says that war movies and social interaction could cause persona degradation on Elster units, two things that became routine for Elster to do with Ariane. Add to that the fact that Ariane canonically looks very similar to Alina Seo, a squadmate and potential lover of the host of Elster's original neural pattern, and you have an Elster that, for the lack of a better word, fell in love in an artificial way. Once Elster suffered persona degradation, she unlocked the memories that Lilith Ito had with Alina Seo, and she saw in Ariane the lover she once had in Alina. Would this love ever spring to life if Elster's memories remained repressed? And additionally, is this love, that is essentially a programming bug, somehow less valid than a real spontaneous romantic connection? I don't know, Yes, it is. Regardless of its validity, it was strong enough for Elster to be willing to endure hell countless times, fight and take down a super weapon, and finally put an end to the suffering and life of her soulmate. But then, is Adler's love for Falk not strong enough? I know Adler is just a silly little guy and that a decent portion of the community likes to consider him nothing but a simp, but the questions we asked about the validity of Elster's love can also be made for Adler. Fundamentally, the only difference between them is that Elster's propensity to fall in love with Ariane is a bug, whereas Adler's propensity to fall in love with Falk is a feature. They are designed to be subservient and extremely attached to their Falk units. It's never specified whether this obsessive attachment is because of the Gestalt memories or if it's just hard-coded into him, but the point still stands. Is Adler's love for Falk somehow less valid? Despite all the length that he goes to and all the things that he does in the name of her and in the name of preserving reality. Because replicas are artificial life forms, the validity of their feelings will always be a topic of debate in one way or another. There is a paradigm that for love to be valid, it cannot be induced, as even though we technically have a small degree of choice over the type of person we fall in love with, it's still something that we don't have proper control over. Sometimes your brain just decides her, and that's it. And yet, if someone were to force me or coerce me to fall in love with them, I can't help the feeling that it somehow violates my free will. Perhaps the main idea behind it is that no one person should have the right to control something that is left to fate for the rest of us, much less a government or a corporation. There is one last topic I'd like to touch on, and I'd really like to see what the different takes people might have on this. Bros, who is the villain of Signalis? The most straightforward answer would be Adler. He tried to kill Elster and Nisa multiple times and sabotaged us throughout our journey. That would comfortably make him the main antagonist of the story. But the antagonist is merely the character who opposes the protagonist. I am asking about the villain. Sure, he does some reprehensible shit, but wouldn't you do the same if you were trying to protect a loved one and maintain the integrity of your reality? The actions he does are evil, yes, but they are in the name of a greater good. Literally the greatest good possible, as if there is no reality, there is no good left to be done. Our next contender would be Falk, the final obstacle between Elster and Ariane. But from all the clues we gathered, Falk is simply a victim of circumstance. Sure, she technically is the leader of a super gulag, but it's not like she chose to do that out of her own volition. As a matter of fact, she was created with that purpose, and despite being a super weapon, it's not like she could oppose Eon. She, just like Adler, didn't get a say in the position she was going to assume, as she was quite literally fabricated to take that role. How culpable can Falk and Adler be when they were born into a deterministic system and every aspect of the society they live in is designed to ensure that they keep serving their purpose, lest they be discontinued? Could you argue that those two could have gone about their tasks in a slightly less authoritarian way? Maybe, and they probably could. But can they be held accountable for their actions when Eon is keeping them hostage? They would be decommissioned if they weren't performing optimally, and their brain was probably programmed to work that way. Another contender for the villain of Signalis is none other than our wife, Ariane. After all, she is the one responsible for causing the epidemic that led to the unfathomable suffering of countless replicas and gestalts alike. But she could be even more culpable if you consider that she's the one resetting the cycle every time Elster fails to fulfill her promise, making everyone at Sierpinski suffer the same fate over and over again. I don't know about your personal definition of hell, but I would say that having to relive the same experience of working at a super gulag and then contracting an eldritch disease that makes you go insane and have your skin fall off time and time again is probably up there. If you look at it through that lens, and you also consider the fact that she's been watching Elser through her entire journey, represented by the red eye you can see by upping the brightness, then it means that Ariane is basically manipulating reality and putting countless innocents through cyclical torment in the name of what is ultimately a selfish, albeit romantic goal. Even if you consider that the replicas are just robots, Ariane clearly doesn't think that on account of the fact that she was banging one of them. I can see her thinking that this is her way of getting back at Aeon by tormenting authority figures like Fakh and Adler, but Eul-32 had jack shit to do with any of that, and the pain she has to go through every cycle is almost as big as the one I feel having to edit this video.
It's been 19 fucking years.
The final villain contender would be Aeon itself, and of course they are very far from squeaky clean. And as an ominous authoritarian government, it's very easy to just point fingers at it and say that they are the true villain, but it doesn't feel satisfactory. In the sense that I want to point at an individual and label them villain. But yeah, to my knowledge, there isn't a single redeemable thing that Aeon does, at least nothing that I could remember from either the documents or the wiki. The two references we have of how they run things are the labor camp and the apartment complex that needs wardens for whatever fucking reason. I guess the moral of the story is that, aside from Aeon being pretty irredeemable, Signalis is a story about how far people are willing to go when they are put through hell. And that accounts for their willpower, their cruelty, their desperation, and everything in between. It's a story of people willing to cause and endure hell in the name of love. If you couldn't tell by the length of this video, there is a lot to talk about when it comes to Signalis. The sheer volume of discussion that can be had when speculating about this game is almost infinite. From theory crafting to philosophical debates, if I really were to explore all the different aspects of this game, in all likelihood we would be here for triple the time. And even so, there would still be hours worth of topics of discussion left to be had. I made this video because Signalis sort of becomes a hyperfixation to everyone who plays it, and whether you play through it or not, I'm sure that after all this you can see why. Once you pick up this game, you won't be able to leave it alone for a month. What have we learned from this experience? Well, do not meddle with powers beyond your comprehension, you can turn a flare gun into a grenade launcher, and lesbians love jumping down holes. Signalis is so fucking good, bro, I wish women were real.